This video is sponsored by NordVPN. So, Birdman and the Winter Warrior just finished, and it was acceptable. It was fine, I guess. I gotta say, I think the second MCU show doesn't really hit the same way as WandaVision, but I also don't think comparing the two is very fair either. Other than the fact that they're set in the same universe, these two shows could not be more different. Though it does go without saying that I enjoyed WandaVision a lot more. I mean, I don't think anybody's surprised about that. Personally, I've never been a fan of Falcon in any of these movies, and I'm not the biggest fan of the Captain America movie trilogy that came before this. And as such, I'm kind of whatever on this new show. But before we get into all of that, we have a quick word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by NordVPN, and if you haven't heard about NordVPN by now, you're in luck because I'm going to tell you all about it, whether you want me to or not. If you ask me, I think the world would be a better place if everybody was using a VPN. And you really don't know how much you need a VPN until it's too late. If you're surfing the net without a VPN, then your data and personal information is pretty exposed. I remember back in the day, I didn't think this mattered at all, and I didn't think I needed a VPN, and then I got my information stolen. And it sucked, but now I use a VPN, and I don't have to worry at all. And right now, my buddies at NordVPN are letting you guys get a 2-year plan at a huge discount. Just go to nordvpn.com/Cosmonaut and use code Cosmonaut to get 1 additional month free. It's also risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. I always say that using public Wi-Fi without using a VPN is like driving without a seatbelt. But with NordVPN, all of your internet data stays safe behind a wall of next-generation encryption. And plus, that's not the only thing that you can do with a VPN. VPNs let you do some fun stuff too. Most people use their VPN to access region-locked content. For instance, if you live in the UK, you guys don't have access to the Dark Knight trilogy like we do. But with NordVPN, all you gotta do is click on what region you want to watch stuff from. And my fellow Americans may already be aware that we do not get Ghibli movies on our Netflix. However, if you switch your VPN over to the UK, you can watch all of them, like Castle in the Sky, the best Ghibli movie. And no, I will not listen to anybody who wishes to tell me otherwise. So again, head over to nordvpn.com/Cosmonaut and use code Cosmonaut to get a 2-year plan, plus 1 additional month with a big old discount. And of course, I would like to thank NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Now, there are a few things I enjoyed in this series that stopped it from being a total slog. I really enjoyed the bromance between Bucky and Sam. I think their performances and their chemistry is actually pretty good. Overall, I think all the actors in this show are doing a pretty good job. And I actually really enjoyed that a lot of this show is just people talking to each other. And that's why the relationship between Bucky and Sam works so well for me. There are a lot of long scenes of them just sitting around and talking to each other. The show is very slow, and it does take its time with these characters, and that's something that I didn't really mind. I found myself enjoying these character moments a lot more than the boring karate fights. This show kind of exists to give these two characters therapy, which is something that they really need after all the shit that they've been through. It's very much a show about acclimating to the new world order of the MCU. And while on the topic of that, I really like that the socioeconomic ramifications of the Thanos snap are explored more here. That sentence is actually pretty funny to say out loud. There are a lot of interesting concepts that are brought up here, and like I said in the WandaVision review, that's stuff that I've been wanting to see from the very beginning. For instance, what happens to people who didn't get snapped away when somebody reappears in what used to be their home? How do banks deal with half of the population reappearing and asking for loans? These are very cool ideas, and I like that the series focuses on them a lot. It's the one thing that makes the MCU super unique compared to other comic book universes. Like, there's a big, important, crazy thing that happened to everybody, and there's not a single character that hasn't been affected by it in some way. I think it's a storytelling device that has a lot of potential, and I'm very excited to see more movies and shows explore it. But anyway, there are also a couple characters that I enjoyed way more than I expected to. Firstly, Baron Zemo kinda steals the show here, which is surprising because I don't really care for him in his previous appearance. But here, he gets to be like the weirdo third-party member for a good chunk of the show, and I was really into it. He brought a completely different energy to the group that I loved. Like, we have the super honorable, honest guy, and then the awkward, edgy cyborg, and like a evil, rich weirdo. I don't know, I just think it worked, and it broke the monotony of the show for me. And I gotta say, I'm just glad that he got to be a cool character. I think the best thing about these shows is that they're not really trying to tie into some overarching plot line. They just exist to flesh out characters that we really didn't get time to fall in love with. And lastly, I really enjoyed US Agent's character. Up until the last episode, that is. I really loved the idea of a corrupt Captain America who's just the opposite of what Steve was. Someone who went into the military system and didn't come out a perfect hero like Steve. I thought that was a super interesting idea, and watching him get worse and worse was very exciting. Plus, the show has the difficult task of getting us to buy into the fact that Sam has to become Captain America. And by showing us a bad Captain America first, it makes it easier for us to accept the idea of Sam becoming the new Captain America. However, all of this kind of gets ruined in the finale, and I was very disappointed to see US Agent just become a good guy in the end. I feel like he has a very boring and dissatisfying story arc. I think he was much more compelling as a villain, especially compared to the actual villain that we get in the show. And that's where we're going to move on to things that I do not like in this show. I really believe that this show has a terrible main villain. She's meant to be a revolutionary freedom fighter, but the show tries way too hard to get us on her side when her perspective is kind of disjointed and confusing. For instance, she wants to bring the world back to before the blip, and she wants to unite people, but she's also fine with excessive violent murders. We're told that the people who came back to life after the events of Endgame have been given preferential treatment as opposed to the people who never got vanished away in the first place. And that is an interesting idea, and I would have liked to see them play with that a little bit more. The show tells us that during that 5 years where half the population was gone, everything was a little bit nicer than it was before, and that humanity was more united. Now that's in contrast to what we actually saw in Endgame, where everything was kind of shitty and really depressing. I think the only way that this show could have gotten us on this character's side is by showing us a flashback to everything being great, and then out of nowhere everybody starts appearing and chaos ensues. I think that we need something like that, because as an audience, we saw the 5-year time skip as something that's very traumatic and depressing for everybody involved. And if this show is going to tell us otherwise, we are going to need to be shown proof. But the main villain just spends a lot of time whining about how life isn't fair, and then murdering people, and then interacting with other characters in ways that are supposed to make us feel bad for her. But as far as what we are shown on screen, we see her doing more insane, evil shit than good shit. So the fact that the show really wants us to see her as, this tragic character that maybe we can side with, I don't know, it just doesn't work for me, because we're never shown any of her good sides. Like, oh no, she's sad that an old lady that she was friends with that we never met has died. And oh no, she's sad that her friends are dying. Oh, and she's killing innocent people and saying insane shit again. Alright, well, what am I supposed to believe here? And it's even more awkward that our main characters don't see her as the bad guy either. I understand that it makes sense for Sam's character to want to de-escalate situations, and he doesn't want to kill her. He wants to try to work things out with her. But he's a little too much on her side. He's more on her side than I think Steve Rogers would be. And it especially sucks because you can't just ignore this and focus on the good things in the show, like the Falcon and Bucky stuff. This is the entire plot. So if you don't like this, then it's very hard to enjoy the show. I feel like US Agent should have been pushed more as a main antagonist. He's a character that doesn't even really need to be forced into the villain role, because people are already going to hate him. Having our main characters go up against a guy who's kind of stealing the Captain America mantle is a very fun idea, and it would make it even more satisfying when Sam becomes Captain America in the end, because we were rooting for that for the whole show. I don't know, I just think it's a big missed opportunity. And speaking of missed opportunities, I think Bucky is very underused in this series. Considering the fact that he's the second main character, it's weird that he feels like the sidekick. He doesn't really get a lot of time to focus on his own issues like Sam does. Sam arguably has the bigger character arc to go on, but in most episodes, Bucky gets nothing to do other than punch people. Sam has this, like, giant, well-written subplot about race and the secret black super soldier that he has to get to know, and meanwhile, Bucky just goes to therapy a couple times, and then he's just, like, sad all the time. I really liked the little plot line he had with the old man, and I like how in the first episode we see how difficult it is for him to acclimate to the new world, where half the population came back, and where he's still a 100-year-old dude who can't get a date, and he hasn't been allowed to live in America until very recently, and his best friend turned into Joe Biden and then disappeared. Like, there's a lot to work with here. I don't understand why Bucky is so underused again. I think I can safely say that between Infinity War, Endgame, and this show, Bucky Barnes is the MCU's most underutilized character. But on the broader side of my problems with this show, I think the show itself is just kind of boring. I know I said I wouldn't compare it to WandaVision, but I had no interest in watching this weekly like I did with WandaVision. The MCU is now able to do so many experimental, interesting things, and like a sitcom spoof about loss and acceptance is a really cool idea. But a show about spies fighting terrorists, it's just not doing it for me, I don't know. This series just kind of struggled to grab me, and I think it might be a personal issue because, like I said, I already wasn't the biggest fan of these characters or this series. And from episode to episode in this show, I kind of just felt myself zoning out because I just didn't really care about what was happening. The action is very dull, all of the fights kind of look the same, and you can't tell what's going on because the camera won't stay still. And the plot is not very interesting. The characters are more interesting when they're just ignoring the plot and talking to each other. And I don't know, I just think as a whole, I did not really enjoy this one. And this show isn't really bad. I mean, it doesn't have a bad script. I like how it brought up race without being ham-fisted. And oddly enough, I liked the Falcon. I liked his character arc, which is something I didn't expect to say at all. But it's not really enough to save this one for me. I think personally, this is just not the content that I enjoy in the MCU. So I'm going to wrap this up and give Falcon and the Winter Soldier a 5 out of 10.